Good morning. So 10 years ago is when Instagram first launched as a photo sharing app. Remember all those latte photos back in the day? It's grown to over 1 billion people that are using Instagram to connect and get closer to the people and the things that they love. That includes creators like Cleo. That includes businesses like Bombas, the big brands that Droga works with. And it's become a multifaceted experience where 500 million people are using stories every single day, 200 million people are going to the Explore tab, and from the climate change strikes last week, where young people around the world is really incredible, came to life on Instagram and around the world, to SpongeBob memes, to the Yeehaw agenda. I just learned that term with Lil Nas X and other artists, to the infamous Instagram photo hoax. I hope none of you posted that. It's not true. And I was just reading on my flight out last night about the first vertical concert. So Mabel is a pop R&B artist, and apparently this is it's being billed as the first concert that was created and designed to be recorded in vertical format in the stories format. So today we're going to talk about community, culture, Instagram stories, and more. I'm joined by 3 amazing individuals that I want to introduce. I'm going to start with Cleo Wade. So poet, artist, author, named one of America's most influential women by Marie Claire, one of the 100 most creative people in business by Fast Company, and New York Magazine calls her the millennial Oprah. I like that. Very good. You have a new book that's coming out next month. I just got an advance copy last night. Thank you. So far, it's amazing. Please welcome Cleo Wade. Randy Goldberg is an ad industry veteran. He's the co-founder and chief brand officer of Bombas. Bombas was founded in 2013. It's a comfort-focused socks and apparel brand with a mission at its core. 1 pair of socks purchased equals a pair donated. I'm actually wearing Bombas socks today. I have to say, quite comfortable.
All right.
Very, very nice.
It's your first Bombas?
It's my first Bombas, yes.
Just in time. All right.
Welcome, Randy Goldberg.
Thank you.
And then Amy Avery, so Chief Intelligence Officer at Droga5, has been at the center of many of Droga's influential and ambitious campaigns. Amy's focused on data-driven storytelling and innovation in understanding consumer behavior. Please welcome Amy Avery. So I'm going to put you all on the spot and start off with a question just to get to know you a little bit as people. What was the last post or story? I'll give you a little time. I'll go first and give you a little time to think. Last post or story that you did on Instagram. So for me, I took my family down. I've got 2 kids. My family down to do a beach cleanup. We were talking about Ocean Beach earlier, so we did a beach cleanup last weekend. I brought my surfboard down, and we got some good work done, but I snuck out and got a little surf at the same time. So made for some good Instagram content. I'll start with you. What was your last post or story?
Well, that's pretty easy because I posted this morning. As most of us know, today is National Voter Registration Day. And so I created a post incentivizing people to register, find out where their polling places are, and get involved with different voting organizations that are either working towards ending voter suppression or putting a stop to gerrymandering across the country. And that's really one of my favorite things about Instagram, because with one hashtag, you can really organize people and have a movement towards things that are important to you.
Amy, what was your last post or story?
Gosh, I'm embarrassed to say my son likes to use my phone to film me in stories doing things with my daughter. So me attempting TikTok, which is not good. If you can imagine, I can't do dance moves. But it's my son filming my daughter and I who's quite good at it.
Cool. My last post, we're about to head out on a retreat with the whole Bombas team. So it was just posting some inspiration to get ready. And then on the Bombas account, our last post was about some new fall product that we launched. So we sort of trade off between product posts and posts about our giving partners and our mission.
Where's the retreat happening?
Upstate at a camp.
Very nice.
It's a secret location. You're not invited.
So let's start with you, Cleo. So tell us a little bit about your work, and I'm also very interested in what originally inspired you to start posting photos of your poetry on Instagram. Can you remember way back in the day?
Well, I was one of the last of any of my friends to get on Instagram, and I remember thinking that when all of them were getting on, because I probably got on maybe like 2 or 3 years after anyone, and I just remember thinking like, I just don't know what I would have to share. And so I really thought for a while about, if I wanted to create anything that lives as an extension of myself, right? Because the second you put something online, it is there when you are no longer there. And when I realized that, I was like, I think that there's words and ideas that I would like to live in the world beyond me being able to physically say them in one room or to one group of people. And so that was when I wrote my first Instagram post, and I think that it said, something along the lines of, "Dear world, I am here today to tell you about my unbreakable nature, signed Women Everywhere." And that was it.
Amazing.
Cool.
So you've got this vibrant community on Instagram. With your new book coming out, what role has the community played in the creation of the book, and how do you think about that relationship with your community?
Well, it's really interesting because we often look at Instagram as a place where we go to share, right? So we think about what we are outputting, but it's actually the most amazing listening platform there is to me, because it's a two-way street. For every one thing you put out, you can get hundreds of thousands of comments back. And so because of that, I feel so constantly in tune with and informed by the people who are following my work, or who stand for the same things or care about the same things. And so it's such an amazing place to have this constant dialogue. And so when I was creating my new book, I remember I was on tour, and one of the things about touring is that you obviously can't go everywhere. And so the thing you constantly hear online is like, what about Atlanta, or what about Miami, or what about this place? But when you do post on Instagram, you can go everywhere. And so a lot of the new book that I created called Where to Begin is about the feedback that during this time that we're living in, exactly, where people feel so overwhelmed and so stressed, and I feel like everyone's anxiety is so high. I was able to pull a lot from the way that people were feeling by what they would share with me on Instagram, as well as in person on my tour. And so I really felt like it's almost as if I got to just write a letter back to everyone, almost like, there was a complaints and compliments box, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna be able to get to all of this, and that was really why I wrote this book.
So for you, Randy, does that resonate from a community perspective? What is the role of Instagram and the community for Bombas?
Yeah, for us, the community is really everything. It's why we started the company, right? To give back and to connect to the communities where we all work and live. And then when we put something out in the world, it's the same thing. We're getting a ton of feedback about our mission, about products, about different giving partners. And it's also been a great place for us to recruit talent. People who see what we're doing and kind of self-select to come and work at our company. We take care of our people are connecting back to the wider community, and it really is just an amazing feedback loop, in addition to just a place for inspiration and a place for a conversation.
Mm-hmm. I was talking at the beginning, and that was just really like a few examples from the last week, but Instagram has become this place that is reflecting as well as actually influencing culture around the world. I'm interested, for many of us in our day-to-day roles, a lot of it is keeping up with the trends and keeping up with what's happening in culture. At Droga, how do you keep your finger on the pulse, and how do you think about that?
A couple ways. First, every morning the team has to actually go in and follow things and read and see what people are talking about. That's the easy thing. But we also built a tool called TrendSpotter. It's actually built on social data, so it reads platforms like Instagram to be able to identify things in 3 categories. Are they emerging? So this is starting to become something. Are they mainstream? It's out there, it's been out there, but it's there to stay for a bit, or is it oversaturated? It doesn't really matter anymore. if you think in those in easy terms, it's how you follow stuff personally. At the beginning, when something is emerging, you're seeing it on social, you hear about it from a friend. It's in smaller sources and in smaller batches, but you kind of see it everywhere. When it's mainstream, you've also hit that news source, but you still have a good balance. And that oversaturated, you've left the social platforms. Those trends are done. They're documented in their news. And that's functionally what that tool does for us, to help keep an eye on what's happening.
That's an internal tool that you built?
It's an internal tool we built. Although functionally, if you just think of kind of those ways of where you find information is a very big indicator of it, but also being present in the things. I follow everything from, and the team does anything from skateboarding to food brands to fashion and home brands, because I want to know across them what are commonalities that we can find.
What's a trend, a consumer trend happening right now, and I'd like to ask all of you this, that you think marketers should be thinking about at this point?
I'd say relevance. It's, as a data person, everything was super targeted and super relevant, and then everyone was like, oh my gosh, I don't want you to know anything about me, back off. And there's this world where everyone wants to be part of a community, and people want to take part, and people want to do good, but helping navigate them and get them to the right connections, I think, is super important. And for brands to figure out how do they connect people to the things they care about. If you look at last Friday's March, how as a brand can I engage in that and help give people something tangible to do so that I'm still relevant to them about a thing they care about?
Cleo, what's a trend happening right now that the marketers in the room here should be thinking about?
I think it's just really critical at this point in history to make a distinction between being political and being partisan. I don't think anyone wants a brand or a marketer to tell them how to vote, but I do think that they want people to tell them that they care about the same things that they care about, and they believe that we all should be participating, because we can't move forward and we can't create the change that we deserve in the world around us. And I think we all know that we deserve change in some way, regardless of which political party box you check. Mm-hmm. I think we all know that the state of the world as it is right now is not good enough, and it's not good enough for us, and it's not good enough for our children, and we don't currently have a world that is even inheritable for our children. And I think that that's obvious to every single person. And so, for brands, I think it's important to say, we have created our own culture of purpose within our own company, and we allow for that to be shared with our community. So we tell you what we care about, we tell you what we feel passionate about, we tell you what feels purposeful to us. And I think that makes such a difference between how people want to engage with a brand or not, or when and how quickly they'll turn their back on you. I mean, we're also living in the age, I think we're living in like the age of care and the age of culture at the same time, whereas we really respect you when you talk about what we care about, and when you don't, we're really quick to cancel you or hold you accountable in a really radical way. And so I think finding that balance is really critical.
What's a trend that you would share?
I think I look at brands, and most brands today are taking some sort of stand on the issues of the world today, which is great. And I think it seems like it feels necessary for brands to speak out about the things they believe in, about their business practices, about the way of the world. But I think it also has to come from a place of authenticity. It has to seem like natural to the brand that is speaking out. And I think the brands that are having the most success are meeting consumers where they are. They're not asking people to come into their world anymore. They're going there, they're participating, and they're willing to make mistakes. And I think brands that are a little bit open, listening, and having a conversation rather than just trying to attach themselves to a trend are doing the best. So I think there's this openness and this communication with the best brands in the way they're communicating with customers and attaching themselves to culture and participating in a way that it was probably unthinkable 20 years ago, except for a few proud, strong brands.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. I totally agree with that, because I remember during, when we were having the month that celebrates the LGBTQ community, I can't tell you how many young people, no matter what brand was putting a rainbow on this or having a t-shirt that went to this, the one thing that every single person, especially young people who become your number one consumers, is that they were like, well, what are you doing all year round? So even when you think about attaching yourself to the trends, think about how that story, you can tell that story in a way that is actionable for caring about that year round. So whether it's to say, you know, we donated to these efforts during this month, but those efforts allow for this organization to function within their yearly fiscal budget. And I think that that's also critical, because that's how you, that type of inauthenticity is actually how you kind of like leave the care box and enter into the cancel box really quickly.
Totally. I mean, for Pride, just as an example, you know, we have a large network of charities, giving partners that we work with, and we were able to poll our giving partners that work most in the LGBTQ space, bring them into the fold, figure out how we can work our donations in for that month. And we're working with these giving partners year round, but to highlight it during that time, work with artists from that community, and all of our efforts were sort of run through a filter of, hey, this is stuff that's already in our world. How can we bring it to the front? How can we make the people, the creators from these areas at the forefront of what we're doing? And I think that avoids a lot of that. You have to just be very careful. And being careful is not about protecting your brand. It's about being respectful for the movement that you're trying to help or the cause that you're trying to get behind. Otherwise, it just seems like
You're trying to benefit from, you know, the oppression or struggles of other people who really not only need the spotlight, but need for the promises that you make in that month to last beyond that month.
Has to become part of the DNA. So Bombas started with it. It was actually built on that foundation.
Right.
For other companies that didn't start that way, it can't be once a year. It has to be actually part of what you're doing, part of the culture. That makes
I'd say you have to know your brand purpose, right? Why you exist in the world as a company. And if it can align to that, be part of the conversation. And if you can't, if your purpose doesn't align to those things, you shouldn't. You have no right to talk about it. And consumers, to your point, they see that so quickly. You know, it does you no good to attach to something that isn't true to the actions you're taking as a brand and the beliefs you have as a brand.
I'm always looking for great new accounts to follow on Instagram. Amy, can you share one account that impresses you or has impressed you, not just because the content is interesting or inspiring, but because of the way they're actually using Instagram as a new medium?
Toss up between, do I choose a personal account that I follow or
Could be a public figure, it could be a business, whatever.
I'm going to go business. I'm going to go Sweetgreen, which I never thought I would sit up here and say. Except that I think it's funny, talking to a couple of friends, we all said the same thing. It's a brand that I think uses all of the ways it can, Instagram to ask for voting on new things, to use IGTV to show how you shop locally, to do some of the things yourself. It has salad memes, which are a thing. I think the way they use the variety of ways to connect with people, they understand that yes, it's a product, but also how do you change your life in different ways? How do you bring the health that they offer into that? I think as a brand is very interesting. When I look at the content, I forget that it is a company. I think of it as a person talking to me, and I think that's key. I feel connected to them.
What about you, Randy?
I guess I'd bring up another apparel brand. I don't know if you guys know the brand Noah. It's a New York-based clothing company, apparel company. Comes from the street and skate world. The former designer from Supreme started it, but they've started with a stance of using their base and the following and the clothing to take a stand on issues. And you go in the store and it's filled with young people. You look at their Instagram, they're telling stories in a really unique way. They're highlighting things from the past that help, you know, bring issues today more into light. It's just a really smart brand, really well-designed clothing, well-made things, and they're talking about how they're making things the right way and the things that they care about and the causes that they're benefiting through the sales of their clothing. So great brand, great Instagram account.
I like literally want to go there right now.
I know, I want to
I was
check
like,
it out
I'm
as
feeling
well.
very influenced. I all of a sudden
both
want a
these accounts.
salad. I want a t-shirt. For me, I think that Instagram's an amazing place to get news, especially about things that you care about that might be on the sidelines in mainstream media. So I follow a lot of either trans-specific, people of color-specific news outlets or educators. So whether that's Brittany Packnett or The Root or Unbothered, which is Refinery 29's Black woman-focused space. And, you know, to me, it's a way to be able to find the stories and inspiration that you're not going to get on CNN. Although I will say CNN has been really great on Instagram lately, if anyone else has noticed that.
I'd agree with that, actually.
Yeah, all of a sudden they have
Yeah.
like all these like really sweet, beautiful video. I feel like they're trying to balance the way they torture us on TV by being really delightful on Instagram.
So while we're on culture, and I'll start with you, Amy, will you talk about a campaign that Droga's done, or one that you've worked on, that connects to a larger cultural moment or movement?
Yeah, hands down, I'd say New York Times. It is a brand that is so tied to culture and what is happening, and I think understanding kind of a few key trends that we could observe. One, right, the news is under attack, obviously, but the people that pay for news pay for it because they're supporting news, and people want truth. They appreciate the value and the effort it looks into. I think the latest campaign, which is up on the screen for New York Times, is the most recent version of that, and it's looking at women's rights, and we're paid less, we have less opportunity, and all of the truth behind that. But it's the pure research of that, not the hype and the drama. It is the facts that sit behind that, and really using a variety of channels to connect with you. Sometimes that is using stories to show behind the scenes what a reporter is going through to get to the end story you see that is one picture and 1,000 words. But that is months, sometimes years of work. And I think Stories does that beautifully, but sometimes it's like the work that you can see on screen where it's very finished, polished, beautiful work that makes you feel so attached to a cause or a topic that's being talked about. I think it's such an easy brand in terms of understanding culture and having a point of view on it, but staying true to that purpose of supporting truth.
And for Bombas, I saw a recent campaign, would love for you to talk about, lead you to the Muhammad Ali campaign, because I just thought that was so incredible, and I think it really tied to this larger cultural moment.
Yeah, we have a multi-year partnership with Muhammad Ali brand, and we tend to choose partners who have some connection to giving back to the community where they came from or fighting for causes. And Muhammad Ali obviously fought for a lot of people in his life. He stood up for what he believed in, and we loved his sort of spirit inside and outside the ring. So we were developing socks for years, and then we came up with this campaign, What I Fight For, and we put that out there. And the response from people was, I mean, incredible. I think that just seeing the willingness to talk about what people are standing up for in today's world and how that related back to Muhammad Ali, it was really touching, I think, for all of us inside the company, and a little surprising, the overwhelming response from people of all walks of life and other brands and people supporting this notion of getting out there and standing up for what you believe in and fighting for something.
And it's actually a good, and I'd love to hear about the organic pieces and the advertising pieces seem to all work together, and it's a good segue into Instagram Stories as a format. I was saying in the intro, 500 million daily actives, 3 million advertisers using Stories at this point. Will you talk more about that campaign and how Stories fit in, how you think about that?
I mean, I feel like Stories was the central part of that campaign. So what we did was created, so I guess this is footage from the Muhammad Ali Center where we went and donated socks and had other companies that are in our network donate other products, and we went out in the community in Louisville and handed out socks and t-shirts and amenity kits, and we're there with Muhammad Ali's widow, and I think a lot of that action, it's sort of, the heart of it ended up in Stories. So we gave people an opportunity to repost, a picture of Muhammad Ali with What I Fight For. It's pretty simple, but just giving, I think, one little frame, and people just took it and ran with it and designed around it and filled in the blank for what they fight for. And we were looking at this, and it was just a flood of amazing activity that also coincided with the event where we were donating products and showing up in person to also be there with the team from Muhammad Ali. So it was a mix of an in-person event and an online Stories campaign and an Instagram campaign. And we're also putting spend behind this as an advertising campaign. And we do this with a lot of our mission-based creative. And we don't really distinguish between our organic content really and the content that we put spend behind. Mm-hmm. For us, there's the same editorial filter for everything. And if we wouldn't put it out as organic content, we're certainly not going to put spend behind it. And if it doesn't look like something that would be created by us, it's not going to show up on our feed anywhere. So we don't really distinguish. It's just about what can find the biggest voice and how we can get it out to the most amount of people.
And what we're seeing here, there's a lot of what looks like behind the scenes content. It is, Amy, you were talking about that can be behind the scenes, more spontaneous, or even more polished. For Bombas, has it been any advice or tips on the types of things that are working well in stories? And I would love to hear from you then, also Amy.
Oh,
Yeah, for Bombas.
what's working
yeah.
well in stories?
I'll give my
So for
opinion
us,
on
I
Bombas
think
if you
the content that tends to work best is when there's a mix of stuff that is a little bit more raw, a little bit more like shot by someone on our team, and then we mix that in with content that we're creating that has a little bit more of polish, a little bit more intention behind it, a little bit more of that, classic creative that's coming out of, our team internally as well.
Yep.
And I think we keep things pretty tight because we don't really have an outside creative agency that we work with, and it all comes from our team. But the idea of mixing that kind of high look with the low and having it all mixed together and reminding people that there's a team behind this who's doing this, and these are the real people who work at our company, and then mixing that with, shots of Muhammad Ali and things that are from the archive.
Are there types of content or storytelling that you found or have data behind that work best in stories?
Yeah, it's everything. I think if you think of it like how you think of conversation with people, right? You're making a connection with a brand. I want to see the polished side of you. I want to see who you want to represent yourself as, but I also want to know everything that sits behind that. And I think that's where stories, sometimes that is, both in feed and in stories, I think seeing in a good variety, to your point, is really important. I also think being top of the funnel and lower funnel, sometimes I see a beautiful thing, but I also want it. And being able to connect to that is important. I think people pretend it's an awareness platform. It's not, it is also that, but it's, it is that full range of things, the same you would if you were interacting with a brand in person. I want to see who you are up front. I want to know what drives that. I want to know how I could get that if I want to have that. It's all of it. But it's, I think most importantly, it's thinking about it first. What I think doesn't work is when we see brands that think of the social platforms at the end of the process. If you're building a whole campaign and you're filming and you're putting together your thoughts and then you're recutting, that isn't a true version of you. That's not how you'd represent yourself. And I think it's being authentic to whatever platform you're on. As we start with Instagram and create from there, that work outperforms any other work.
Cleo, for you, how has stories changed how you interact, engage with your community?
Well, I think that for me, because Instagram is a place, especially where the static post goes, is where I share my work. But if any of you know the nature of my work, it's, I usually, my goal in the online space is to never kind of energetically dump on whatever's going on in the world. It's to do the opposite, which is uplift during times where you feel overwhelmed or down. And so because of that, I think that a lot of the time people think that I am like either only happy all the time or like definitely always have my shit together. And so for me, yeah.
This is very surprising.
And so I think for me, stories are just, and I think for anyone who, wants to be able to show who they are as a person and their work, which your work is an extension of who you are, but it's not completely who you are. The only thing I'm thinking about today isn't just voter registration. There's a lot kind of going on throughout your day or the random thoughts you have, and you want to be able to give your community access to who you are. It's the same thing as going into your workplace, as you said, and bringing your authentic self to work, which is the person I would define as, responsibly bringing your whole self into a space. And so for me, stories has always been a great place to, be the person who's posting about voter registration, but is also watching Waiting to Exhale with one of my girlfriends, and having takeout. And I think that to be able to, not in the way that we've misused the word authentic or authenticity, but to actually bring that wholeness to your community so that they can know you. I don't think that people can trust you if they don't know you, and they can't know the part of you that you've just decided you want for them to know all the time, because even if they can maybe appreciate it or probably like it, I don't think they can trust it. And I think that trust is critical if you're going to ask people to join a movement, ask people to buy socks, ask people to do anything. And they need to trust your judgment. And they can only do that by getting to know you.
So delving more, moving in a little bit different direction into the advertising on Instagram. We'll start with you, Randy. How do you think about brand advertising versus performance or direct response advertising in the Instagram environment?
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, we don't really distinguish the two things. We don't have a separate brand marketing team from, it's all one idea. So we're just thinking about the stories that we want to tell and figuring out how to get those stories to the most amount of people. So sometimes it's a split between this part of it is good for just organic, let's put it out in stories. Sometimes this is a campaign that we're going to run and we're going to put some spend behind it, and it's going to be between Facebook and Instagram, and it's going to show up differently on YouTube or whatever it is. We're just trying to get things out there, and it's all brand marketing for us, and it's all performance marketing. There really is no distinction in our world. So it all has to perform in a certain way, and we have a high standard for that. And if it's not performing, that's usually an indication from our supporters and our customers or prospects that it's a story they don't want to hear. And we're listening to that and retooling things and going back out with new content. So it's a constant feedback loop.
I've observed this with many companies that have come up on Instagram. It's just, there's a new approach to it, as well as just from a resourcing perspective. Oftentimes it's smaller companies that versus the larger traditional brands, and I think they're learning from this, who have the separate brand and performance departments are trying to bring those together more, because for a small company, you have to introduce people to your brand, explain what it's about, and actually sell the product all in the same fell swoop.
It's a lot.
Through the process. It is a lot, yes.
Yeah, but hopefully, people know what a brand is and know what a company is. You put things out there, if they respond to it, like it's not that simple, but it's kind of that simple.
Yeah. Do you have any insights on this, Amy, the brand versus performance on Instagram?
I'd agree with you, I think. I think those have to be present. Both need to be there, and maybe you lean one way versus the other. But if I look at a brand that does pure brand work and then pure performance work, it doesn't work. And it's back to kind of being your whole self. You forget to connect those, right? If I see an offer over here and it's totally void of the personality you have as a brand, it's a lot less compelling. I think when I see brands do really well, and I think New York Times was an easy example again. If you looked at, there's the truth is worth it. When we can connect that down to subscription and offers, that does much better than to separately say, forget who I was as a brand and why I exist, but by the way, you could get a deal on this paper. Like that doesn't work. I think you have to holistically bring those things together. And I think you have to if you're going to make an e-commerce opportunity there, it's got to be a smooth one. There are brands that I interact with where I think, I was looking through last night actually wondering, I spend a lot of money shopping through Instagram, it turns out.
Me too.
Like an alarming amount. I went back to check and I was like, I should probably check myself on this. But where I consistently spend is when I see the thing that I think I want and it connects me to that thing or to things around that. When I'm able to shop for all of the things that are in an image and understand those, the brands that I go to and I look and it gets to kind of, there's a lag in that experience, or it doesn't bring me to the product that I was looking at, but it brings me back to kind of a master experience for this brand, I'm totally uninterested and I leave. So I think making sure that also that I was in this experience where I was connecting it with the brand, if suddenly I'm like, and here's your homepage, I've lost interest. You've broken up the story we were having, and I think that's really important.
So Instagram shopping is an experience we've been working on for a while. It's good to hear that you're buying things on Instagram. That actually came out of the community. So it was not something that we set out to do. We were observing that people would often get inspired and they would see something that was of interest, and then they would have to jump into the profile and try to find a link to go to it or to go do a search to actually go find those products. So we started removing friction from that customer journey. The other thing we found is that there's not one path. So a lot of e-commerce is about you see something and then you try to make the sale right at that moment. And that's not how people shop. You can't change that process. Sometimes that happens, yep. But often you see something, you want to save it, you want to come back to it later, you want to think about it, you want to read through it before you're actually ready to make that purchase. That's a lot of what we're investing in right now.
Well, I think the frequency of that too. There's so many times that's managed so well by brands where I've taken that step to look, and you're right, I don't buy necessarily the first time, though I do a lot. but that I repeatedly see that and keep being refreshed with content that I like from that brand so that I have an opportunity. So I think also the frequency play is so important, that it's not over the top, I'm not being harassed by a brand, but that I'm like, oh, I did like a thing I looked at there the other day. Okay, click again and finally buy it. So I think if people who kind of focus that into the one moment, that's also a lot harder, is if I'm not ready in that moment, you've kind of lost me.
Randy, I remember before we even talked about having you join the panel here, a few months ago I saved a Bombas ad that came through into my collection. So I wasn't quite ready to make the purchase yet, but I was like, oh, this is interesting. This looks really, really cool.
I'm not ready, but I'm not ready to let go of this.
That's right.
Socks
now,
is a big
now I'm ready.
decision.
Now I'm sold.
Careful.
Well, because sometimes you have to wait until you're ready to put your credit card in and the whole thing, and you're like, I know I want it in my future, but it's not now because I don't know where my purse is.
I think
We are making that easier.
I'd love to see your collections page, right? That's what I'd like to see from everyone, not their feed. I want to see what they've saved from everyone else's feed. That's interesting.
Well, the collection, the saved items, as well as the Explore tab, is very, very telling about your interests and what you're into. We have this thing we've been doing at Instagram where we'll take, if we do an offsite, an internal offsite, we'll take people's Explore pages and throw them up and have people guess whose pages they are, and it's amazing how fast you can guess based on people's interests
Really?
whose page is whose. Yeah.
Your Explorer page will tell you things you don't want to know about yourself.
Yeah.
Though. I said
Let's not
that
do that
when we talked for the first time. It was like, sometimes you open it and you're like, like, what? Because it's just so embarrassing. Like, I'll open it and just be like, why are there 30 dog videos on here? Like, I didn't think I was that person, but I'm obviously
You know
that.
why there are 30 videos.
Because I'm that person.
Amy, what do you think is the biggest mistake marketers make with Instagram or social media generally right now?
I think people tend to assume that they are the target of their brand. And so it's very easy. The number of people I meet with who say, oh, but people don't shop on Instagram, or they're not on Instagram. And I'm like, no, you're not. It might not be a platform you're engaged in, but guess what? Your target is. So I think first is shifting that understanding of a true understanding of what compels your audience, who they are, where they are, what they want to hear from you is super important in making that. And I think the other is thinking of platform first. People that cut down, like I was saying earlier, that it's a huge mistake. You can tell as a consumer where you're like, that was an afterthought. The work that is truly thought out and uses all of the components, like some of these brands we're talking about, like your brand, it's a better experience.
Before we end, I wanted to talk about branded content. So branded content between creators and brands has gotten, it's continued to grow quite a bit on Instagram. It's become a really important part of Instagram. So I'm curious how you think about it. I'd love to start with you, Cleo, about your approach to brand partnerships, how often you do them, how you think about that.
I don't do a ton of them, but for me, it's always important to remember that Instagram is first and foremost a storytelling platform. I mean, what distinguished it from Twitter was that you could match imagery with words and you could actually really tell stories. So as a storyteller, that's really exciting. And I think also for brands, it's really important to remember when they're working with someone who likes to tell stories or someone who's just also really good at like just selling product, because there's a lot of, there's a huge section of people online who are basically like a modern day, like home shopping network. And that's also amazing. And I think that there's a lot more kind of like modern day Joan Rivers on Instagram than we ever imagined there would be, and that's so great. But I think that when you want to actually work with a storyteller, it's really important to say, okay, what story can we tell together? Because I think that a lot of the times the miss I'll have is that someone will ask me to do something and I was like, well, the cool thing about Instagram too is that you could see anything I've ever been into or cared about or talked about. And so to have something that is completely random and like outside of my, I always say like, I don't do anything that's on brand. It's either on mission or it's not. And so you can tell that what my mission is. So because it's relevant in everything I ever post or say publicly. So I think that it's really important for brands to not just say, what product do we want to tell, but what story do we want to tell, and how can we tell this story in a way that only you can tell that story? Because that is also what your followers will take to and be excited about and share. And I can always tell the difference between when someone cares about a post that's sponsored and when they don't.
Yep. And your consistent voice probably attracts the right brands as well. Which
Yeah,
is
that's
nice.
also the
It
best
helps.
part is like I don't actually have to feel like I have to say no a lot either
Mm-hmm.
because usually someone's coming to me and saying like, we really care about this thing or we wanted to visit the Lower East Side Girls Club, so we were wondering if we did this and we did this partnership and how, for example, this post with this t-shirt I made with Express, I'd never made apparel before because I wasn't really interested in making it. But when they came to us and were like, we're not only going to attend the Lower East Side Girls Club Gala as a sponsor, but we're also going to, instead of having like a percentage of the sales of each t-shirt go to the girls club, we're going to make sure that they make at least this much money and we're going to cut the check for that. And then we want to make these t-shirts in this amount. And it just made sense because you could have the impact you wanted and tell the story that was important to you. And that's basically where my yeses come from, because I do think that in this day and age with so much sponsored content, it has to either be a hell yes or a hell no, because anything in between isn't going to translate.
No hell maybes.
No hell maybe.
Well, this has been such a fun conversation because each of you come from different angles, although there's actually quite a lot of common ground, which came out in the conversation. But everything from the different cultural trends to, I hope someone was taking notes on the accounts because I want to go back and follow all the accounts that you talked about, to your approach to IG stories and those learnings. Thank you so much for your time and your insights here. Thank you to all of you and have a great ad week.
Thank you.